welcome to Bada Boom. On today's episode, we welcome back friend and guest Maurice as we talk about the upcoming Ahsoka Star Wars series. Listen in to hear our thoughts. Hey, how's it going, Maurice?
How's it going? Glad to be back.
Hey, man, it's always good to have you back on the podcast. And if you've been listening, you know when Maurice is on the podcast, we're more than likely going to be talking Star Wars. And with Ahsoka coming up, it's great to have you on, man, because there's plenty of things that I think might happen, but I obviously don't know as much as you do about Star Wars. So it's always good to get your thoughts, your ideas, and see if they align with mine, if mine are like totally way in the land of never ever going to happen, or if that's something possible, or maybe just get some context for some characters as well too, because I think there's like 150 episodes of Clone Wars, and I haven't even seen all of those, and I'm sure you've seen all of them multiple times.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Well, first, thank you again for having me on to the Bada Boom podcast. I always love talking to you guys, hanging out, especially talking about Star Wars. But yeah, like with Ahsoka, I'm actually really, really looking forward to this show. I think the last Star Wars show that I was looking forward to this much was maybe like the first season of Mandalorian. But yeah, it's going to be good. At least I have a feeling that it's going to be good. Yeah, like I was looking forward to Boba Fett, but then I don't know, like that turned quickly. But yeah, I think this is going to be good. I don't know if it'll be the best Dave Filoni live action or Star Wars TV series adaptation that we've seen so far, but I think it has potential. So I'm excited.
I think that excitement is definitely justified because from what I remember reading, Jon Favreau, of course, has done a lot for The Mandalorian, and he's also very much attached to Ahsoka as well, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that energy and that excitement for The Mandalorian, I don't think I can recall anything that Jon Favreau has really done where I was like, that wasn't the best thing to do. So I think that energy is definitely well placed, and like there is a decent amount of hype that is actually true for the series, just how it was for The Mandalorian.
And like I think so a lot of people, at least in the recent year or two, especially with how people felt about the last season of The Mandalorian, there's been rumors about whether or not certain executives were getting too hands-on into the production of the show and really limiting the creativity of Favreau and Filoni, and that's what led to different decisions that they didn't intend in the plot line and stuff. But with this show, they get to start brand new again, sort of. I mean, there's some relevance to other things that's happened in Clone Wars and Rebels, of course, but they get to start a brand new show again, first season, kind of a clean slate, and really just build the story that they want to build. And I'm hoping that we get 3-4 seasons out of this without too much like commercial interaction with it.
Yeah, and I hope it's 3-4 seasons. I've heard rumors, and we won't dive into them too far, that all these shows are going to build to some sort of unannounced movie. And I feel like if that was the direction, or that is the direction that all these series are going, that's kind of why the last season of The Mandalorian kind of had a anticlimactic ending. Because they got to save some of that stuff for a movie where they've got the bigger budget and all that stuff. But for this series, for Ahsoka, still again in the same time period, kind of like as The Mandalorian, post Empire falling, between episodes 6 and 7, the Empire is trying to regain power and find a foothold in the universe and the galaxy, and Ahsoka is gonna, it seems like, begrudgingly approach that conflict because she's walked away from all of it. And we've seen that in Rebels, we've seen that in The Mandalorian, and oddly enough, like 1 or 2 episodes of Boba Fett. So hopefully, for me, I'm not looking forward to a lot of like, oh, hey, if there's like 6 episodes, 4 of these episodes are going to be her being like, I don't really want to do this, but I feel like I'm forced to do this. Do you think something like that's going to happen?
I don't think so. And just like you, I'm hoping that that's not the case. I hope we don't, how do I say this? Filoni definitely has a pattern in all of his shows where he'll spend a lot of the beginning episodes just kind of giving you character studies and background and kind of building it up. And it does pay off at the end because you have like this emotional attachment and you understand why everybody's doing what they're doing. But I'm hoping with Ahsoka in this case, because we have so much background for her, because we already know the setting around her with Mandalorian and all the other projects that are going on, I hope we just get straight into the action. Someone did say somewhere I saw they think that they are going to cover like a couple of flashback episodes just to give you an idea of what Ahsoka's been doing in the time between, like you said, the fall of the Empire up until now. But I hope that's it. And then I hope we're just like off on this adventure and we introduce these new characters. We get to learn more about them and see what the story has in store for us.
So I'm glad you mentioned like new characters. And like, this is one of those things where maybe my knowledge of Star Wars is a little outdated, or they're just updating things and I'm not keeping up with it as much as I could be or should be. But at the end of episode 6, obviously it's just Darth Vader and then he dies and Palpatine, allegedly dies, as we know from other aspects of the newest trilogy. And there's supposed to be, at least in my mind as a viewer, from what I've seen, there's supposed to be no more Sith. But then there's always these little pockets of like, oh, hey, we now have like 2 or 3 new Sith, or we have Siths that we didn't know about. And there was supposed to be, I thought, like the rule of 2, where there's not supposed to be a lot of Siths so that they can like contain their power. But as soon as the big bad Siths are gone, there always seems to be like another 3 Siths that pop out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's up with that? I mean, like, it's totally fine that I feel like they're going out of like the rule of 2 and what is the rule that has kind of been like said like in some of the books and some of the other media out there. But it's just almost always like there's going to be a Sith all the time. There's not really going to be like hey, there's just a Jedi that's just here to help, and they're not even the main character. They're just out here doing good. It's just, hey, there's a Sith, there's got to be a Jedi, and there's always one Jedi. Well, not always, but like now I feel like in the recent portrayals we've seen, there's 3 Sith, and then there's 1 Jedi. Like, what are your thoughts on like, hey, we can have all this Sith, even though we don't have all this Jedi? And like, what's up with the rule of 2? Is that not even really a thing that you care about, or like you think the Star Wars fandom even cares about really anymore?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think those are all perfect questions. And I think they're questions that even like the hardcore fans have all like come up against at one point. Like even with the Jedi, it's like, when we're watching episodes 4, 5, and 6, we believe that there's no Jedi. And of course, we have a giant retcon where it's like, okay, there's some Jedi kind of scattered and just been hiding all this time. And Disney and Lucasfilm, they've had this great way of like tying in some kind of loopholes to get them out of sticky situations like this. But one thing that explains the Sith part of it is, so with these new characters that are on Ahsoka, it seems like neither one of them are technically Sith. You could think of the Sith as like a great, like one faction of a religious order, but there's all these different factions that also kind of work alongside, and they have different viewpoints on how they're supposed to use the Force or what their place is in the universe. And that's like Lucasfilm, Disney's kind of way to write themselves out of this pickle that they put themselves in, because like you said, if there's a Jedi or a hero, you have to have a villain that could at least meet them at the same power level. And so they keep popping up with like new Jedis or new dark side, dark Force users and stuff. And sometimes they'll be Sith, and sometimes they'll just be like, oh, this person is just a Force user that happens to not follow the Jedi ways and has an evil, quote unquote, agenda. So like, I'm trying to think of another example. I don't know if you've watched much of the Clone Wars, but do you know who Savage Opress is? And like, he's like the brother of Darth Maul, and like they all come from the same planet.
Yeah.
So this whole planet, there's these witches, and then, the male side of the species with Darth Maul and everything. The majority of them are dark Force users, but they weren't out there trying to conquer the universe per se. And they have a lot of the same similar like power traits, but they're not considered Sith. But even with the Sith background, originally, like if you go way back in the Star Wars canon, or what used to be canon, the Sith were just a species of people on a planet who happened to tap into the Force, and the majority of them were Dark Force users. And the religion didn't come until later. And then even with that religion, which they might show in the High Republic stories later on that we get, in the movies that we get later on, but there were a ton of Sith, like a ton of just Sith people. And it wasn't until one Sith user, and like there was a war that happened amongst them, and then that's how they came down to the rule of two. So technically there could be more Sith, and there could be Sith that just don't follow that rule. But there's always going to be a way that Disney, Lucasfilm, Star Wars finds a way to write themselves out of that rule and introduce new villains and all this other stuff. But getting back to Ahsoka, what I like about these characters is, from everything that people are saying, it seems like these new characters, Balin and Shin, are not going to be Sith, but instead they're going to be, like I mentioned before, some kind of version of a Dark Force user that are not purely evil, but are also not on the light side either. They're supposed to be a foil to Ahsoka, who's also not purely Jedi, but also not evil. So I feel like that's kind of cool. You're giving her like her own kind of balance, I guess, her own like equal, like not someone that's completely evil or completely far gone, but it's also showing as a mirror to where she is in the Force. So I think it could be cool if they use the characters right.
I think that could be cool. And like, as you were talking about that, you know, just because they're Dark Force users, they're not necessarily like Sith. And it kind of reminded me of one of my favorite Sith, which is Count Dooku, because I feel like he's not necessarily like purely evil. He wants like good things to happen in the universe. He's just not necessarily using the best means or his method to go about obtaining it. And that to me, I feel like was maybe like the first experience or like exposure, like, oh, you know, maybe it's not the Sith. It's not like the religious like aspect that we were talking about. It, you know, you can be labeled a Sith or a Dark Force user without having to strictly follow all of their teachings and aspects of it.
Exactly. Count Dooku is actually a great example because, you know, he did start out as a Jedi, and then he fell out of love in their ways. He didn't see them as being practical in the world around him. And just like the same thing with Anakin, you know, there were instances where he really thought the Jedi should step up and like be there for people, but they were too busy following certain dogma or the Republic or whatever agreements that they had already made, to a point where they were too stoic enough to really emotionally connect with the people around them that they're supposed to protect. So like, yeah, like I think Count Dooku is actually a great example, especially with, if you see in some of the books, his relationship with Qui-Gon and how much he cared about Qui-Gon. And even after they did this in the Tales of the Jedi, which was actually a great episode, but right after Qui-Gon died, he's talking to Palpatine. He's like, hey, you had my apprentice killed. And then Palpatine's like, but my apprentice was killed too. And we still have like a thing that we're trying to do. Like there's going to be sacrifices, but we're trying to bring order to this universe, which is great. Which, you know, to tie it back to Ahsoka, apparently one of the rumors is that these two new Dark Force users, whatever their agenda is, it's all to protect that known part of the universe, or galaxy rather, from something that's even far worse than Palpatine. And we're going to hopefully learn about that in this series.
That's going to be pretty interesting. And I think that we're going to have a lot of subplots, I think, with this, because we've got these Dark Force users. We've got some like conflict, it seems, going on between Ahsoka and her apprentice. We've got another person trying to rise as the heir of the Empire. And these are all interesting things to like see in a show. And how they're going to play out, of course, you know, it's going to be a television series. They're going to make it enticing and make you be like, oh, what's going to happen next week? But every time I see something like when we know what's going to happen next, like we know that the Rey series, the Rey trilogy is coming up next, in this timeline. And so I'm always like, okay, well, we know Luke Skywalker was doing X, Y, and Z. We know that he's made appearances in this timeline, and it's gonna be like, well, what's gonna happen next? Like, is this gonna build to a climax where uh, we see the clone version of Palpatine in some way start to influence a young Ben? Are we gonna see some doubt get creeped into the Skywalker that is currently there? Or what? How is it going to connect to the next thing? Is what I'm always trying to see, because that's what really makes like the end of each episode even more enticing. Of like, cool, we saw the end of this episode. I can't wait to see how it's going to connect to the next thing, and it really drives that excitement for me. So at the end of it, what do you think we're going to kind of land at?
I think it's going to be another cliffhanger, because I do think that at some point they're going to try to build up to this climactic event, whether it's a TV series that ties all the TV shows together, or a movie. So I think there is still going to be a cliffhanger. I do think that they also want to fill in some of the plot holes from the movies that we got from the sequel trilogy. And I hope they've handled that elegantly. There's a lot of areas where that could be handled the wrong way. But mainly I'm hoping, honestly, when I first heard that Ahsoka was announced, all I ever wanted was to see one Rosario Dawson just kind of kick ass and own the plot. But I also want to see what happened with Ezra Bridger, which is a character from Rebels, one of the most he just, I don't know if we've ever talked about what happened to Ezra at the end of the season, but that whole series is just a lot of sacrifice towards the end. And it was really, really heartwarming. Filoni was just like, no, this is the end. This is the end of the story. This is just how it goes. And we were all like, I hope this isn't the end, because we want to find out what happened to Ezra. And he was so quiet about it. So I'm hoping we finally get some answers, especially since he's cast in the show. So let's see where that goes.
Watch them be like, hey, what you saw in the trailers is all you're going to see of him, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because I know when some of the games that have come out in the past couple of years, so many people were like, oh, are we going to get Ezra? Is Ezra going to be in this somehow? And then nothing happened. And then now it's like, oh, he's here. And there is a lot of that, like that sacrifice, and the parts I've seen of Clone Wars and Rebels that Ezra is a part of. It's like, those are intense scenes, and you definitely feel attachment to that character, and you want to see, where does that character go? If we don't address it or go too far into what's going on with Ezra and Ahsoka, do you think they might pick some stuff up with him in Tales of the Jedi, or maybe give him his own animated series in some sort of way?
I would hope so. I would love it if they gave him his own animated series somehow. Part of me doesn't think that they will, just because Iger announced they were going to be cutting back on a lot of content on Disney Plus, but it would be so great if they did. Yeah, I don't know.
I will say this, and we've talked about this in passing, and we could do a whole episode about this, but we'll try and keep it to like 5 minutes the most. But the animated content for Star Wars is an untapped well of potential, because just the things we've talked about and we've seen in gosh, why am I blanking on the name of this? None of the episodes are canon, and each episode's like a different story for Jedi. Visions, yes.
Yes.
Like, there's so many episodes of, like, there's only like 8 episodes per season, but like each episode is like, this could be the start of a movie. This could be the first episode of an entire series. And yeah, they don't have a lot to really go on, because they don't need to stretch a story out for 7 episodes. They can be like, yeah, we can put everything in the first 20 minutes of this and wrap it up nice and tidy. But there's certain stories in there where I'm like, if you want to do a part 2, please do a part 2, or just do an hour-long animation of this. So
yes,
I think that if we don't get a lot of Ezra Miller, if there's unanswered questions about what goes on in this, there's not always a way where we can get everything we want in live action shows. And sometimes animation does a great job of stepping in to fill in some of those gaps for the fans, or for the story, or to set up the next story. Sometimes you don't have there's too much plot to lay down to make a live action make sense. So you can just fill it in with a little animation series. So I think for Visions, I know none of those stories are canon, but if they did do something with Ezra or for something else in an animation style, you can flood Disney Plus with that content, Bob Iger, and I'm going to eat it up.
No, but it could totally work. And there are just some things that you can do in animation that you can't, like storytelling wise, that you just can't translate in live action still. And it would be amazing, even if it was just like a special, like they did a year from now, just like an hour-long movie or something like that that was animated. It could be perfect. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, what is going to be like if you could do it like in 2 or 3 sentences, what do you think is going to be your overall prediction for the Ahsoka series?
I think it will be a success. I think it will be. So we have Mandalorian, all those seasons, Book of Boba Fett, Andor, and from the live action TV series, I think that's it. I feel like Ahsoka could compete for one of the top spots of those 4 titles. For me personally, right now, I think Andor is still my favorite, and then Mandalorian, the first season.
I haven't seen Andor yet.
Oh, it's so good. No, I'll be honest, it's a little slow at first, but it's so good. It's like peak, like adult Star Wars, like what you want from a Star Wars entertainment or project as an adult person.
You left out really Obi-Wan.
Oh, Obi-Wan.
Yeah, Obi-Wan.
And I liked Obi-Wan.
I really liked it too. There were plenty of complaints I had about it, or things where I'm like, that doesn't make sense, until I talked to Maurice and he's like, no, it makes sense because of this. So, but I do think Obi-Wan was great. But yeah. You think it's going to take your top spot though? You think Ahsoka's going to be the top spot and take the cake for you?
I think it could. I really do. I really think it could take the top spot.
Well, I know there's going to be some fighting. People are going to have some struggles. People are going to die, and there's going to be something unresolved in the entire aspect of series. I definitely think there's going to be a cliffhanger or something where maybe there's a resolve for some characters, but not for other characters, and something will keep you awake at night.
I definitely think it's going to be a series that drags you along, and not in a bad way, but it doesn't give you the answers. It's just going to keep you coming back. And then you're going to, again, get to the end of the season. It's a cliffhanger. And that's probably going to move when we finally see Ezra. And we don't even know. We still don't have any answers. But that's my prediction.
Is there any content that you would recommend to have people feel like they're prepared to watch everything in Ahsoka? I know we talked Clone Wars, Rebels, different parts of some of the other live action series, but what do you think is the best thing someone should maybe watch to get ready for this series?
I think that people should really watch, and they don't have to. Dave Filoni said you don't really have to watch any of the backstory to understand and enjoy this one. But if you really want to get the Easter eggs and the emotional attachment, I would watch Rebels, the 4 seasons, which isn't too long, just to give you some of the character backstory for Ahsoka and mainly for Ezra Bridger and that crew, because a lot of that crew is going to be in this series. That's what I would recommend. My girlfriend, interestingly enough, was trying to watch these different things to get ready for Ahsoka. And she was like, I'm going to watch the entire series of the Clone Wars. I was like, don't do that. I like the Clone Wars. There's a lot in there that filled in backstory, especially character development that we didn't get for Anakin in the movies. A lot of that is in there. And it really develops the relationship between Anakin and Ahsoka. But I don't think that's going to be the focus for this series, since Vader should be dead at this point. So I really suggest the 4 seasons of Rebels, and that should bring you into Ahsoka.
I think that's a solid recommendation from someone that, me personally, I don't know as much as you do, but that sounds pretty solid. Yeah, I think that's where definitely I think people should start, and they'll feel and be in a great spot. But don't take my word for it. Maurice is our local Star Wars expert. Take his word for it. Well, hey man, is there anything that you wanted to let anybody know about like Ahsoka or anything you want to say to get everyone excited or pumped for it? I mean, I feel like this is the last announced Star Wars project that we're going to have for quite a while. Like they don't have any movies like lined up, and I don't know about any other TV shows that are going to be that have already finished something and maybe it's in post or anything like that. I think this is all we're going to have for quite a while.
This is pretty much the only thing that we know we're going to have for quite a while that is concrete, that is already done and is ready to come out. They've announced, different projects, but we all know that with Lucasfilm, Disney lately, there's been a lot of projects that have been announced but then backed out of. We have Ahsoka right now. We have Ahsoka, and it's something that the fans have been asking for years. It's Dave Filoni's number one favorite character of all the characters he's created. This is like his baby right now. So he's putting all of his passion, all of his talent, and all of his like connections with the entire Star Wars company into this show. And if it's success, then we have his movie in the future that we should be looking forward to as well. But Ahsoka is great. Her character is truly dynamic. She doesn't fall into the whole either light side or dark side. She's really just providing her own path into this universe. And in a weird way, she kind of represents the audience. But if we had powers, if that makes any sense, it's not just
that totally makes sense.
Right. And it's like she's such Rosario Dawson as an actress is just such an empathetic person that you can connect with on screen in any role that she's in. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to getting answers. And it looks good. Like if you just look at the trailers, the graphics, the visuals, they look amazing, especially considering some of the other stuff we've been seeing lately. So I say get hyped for it. It's a truly great character. I'm sure they're going to do her well. And I think we're all going to like it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Ahsoka, it's going to be streaming on Disney Plus soon. Get hyped. Watch those episodes of Star Wars Rebels. If you want to see the other episodes that she's in for Mandalorian, watch those. And there's like 1 or 2 episodes she's in for Boba Fett. But yeah, you're totally right, man. We should be hyped. Can't wait to see what happens. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.
Thank you for listening to the Bada Boom podcast. Keep the conversation going on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Get in the comments on our YouTube channel and let us know what you'd like to hear next. And please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen.